My name is David Martinez, and today we're going to talk about why you should not go on a short-term mission trip.
My name is Nick Forrest, and we're going to talk also about why you definitely should go on a short-term missions trip.
So a short-term mission trip is, what would you say, about a week or 2 weeks, maybe sometimes 3 weeks, where youth groups or maybe college-age students travel to a foreign country and they do mission work? Is that how you would, is that a good definition?
And sometimes I think it can get a little sneaky too, because sometimes it'll even infringe into a month or 2 months. And now there's this assumption like, well, now I'm a long-term missionary. Yeah. No, this is still short. Anything when you have not had to get through your stash of M&Ms, that feels like, okay, now you're still in long-term.
Is there, would you say there's a distinction? How much time do you have to be abroad as a missionary to stop being a short-term missionary?
Well, you gotta at some point confront the culture difference, and you have to be there long enough to appreciate it and still appreciate your own, because there's that sense that, okay, I don't like this here, I could make it better. Wait a minute, there is actually some real value in a different perspective. And then the next piece is when you get home, you get mad at your own people. You get mad at your parents because they just paved the driveway and used all these thousands of dollars and they could have helped people in some other place. And then you can start to appreciate your own place again. Like when you've gone long enough away to where you really miss your own culture. I feel like that's kind of a measure.
That's good. I like that. Yeah. So it's not a certain amount of time. It's not 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's enough time to get over those cultural barriers and appreciate. Yeah, I like that. That's good. But you were a missionary for some years in Tanzania, and you must have received a number of short-term missions trips.
Yeah. Yes. We worked in Tanzania with YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and the Foursquare denomination. And so there were constantly teams coming. Sometimes there were church teams that would come for 2 weeks or even a month. Every once in a while, a family would come, like with their kids. And those were always super meaningful because they had enough stock and skin in the game to actually bring their kids, right? So this was different than just Euro tourism, something like I want to see a different ethnicity and I want to call it a mission trip.
Right. I want to feel good about my vacation. So I'm going to go help for a little bit. And then, that's good.
Or there would be young people that would come for a YWAM discipleship school. And this was probably 4 to 5 months, still short term for the most part, but kind of infringing on the boundaries of short-term missions.
Sure. Yeah. So what's your overall take? Because I maybe have a slightly negative view towards missions trips. I think they often do more damage than good. There's a lot of research out there on the impact of short-term missions trips. We can talk about the white savior complex or Messiah complex. And again, what I mentioned earlier. As a joking, but I have serious too about this idea of I'm a Christian, I'm in the United States, and I really want to go on vacation, but I can't. So I need to go help somebody, and that's how I get my vacation. And in fact, I've heard people say that. I've heard people say during the pandemic, I miss going on missions trips because I miss vacations or
I miss traveling.
Yeah, basically I miss traveling.
As if missions equates to traveling.
Right. Yeah.
I think there is part of that on the part of the naive goer, right? And hopefully the experience is rich enough to where they can overcome that. It doesn't always, the shorter the trip, the harder it is to overcome that. I think a lot of it has to do with the church that sends too. True. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been in a prayer time where someone's sending a group short term and there's this sense of prayer like, when you step on that land, the light will come. Or when you enter this new place, you're gonna meet someone and change their life, as if God isn't already in that place, as if there's not already light, like the scriptures talk about, like glaring, screaming for its own redemption out of the rocks, as if God isn't making all things beautiful, like Ecclesiastes says. And so I guess part of the problem is the way that we set up the trip,
right?
Because I think there's a lot of richness in the trip itself if it has the right thesis,
right?
Like if it knows why it's existing,
right?
I mean, you also were overseas, right? You were raised overseas. Your parents were missionaries receiving teams.
They were.
I wonder, I guess my thought is it different in the age we're in now than it was a generation ago?
I think so. It has to, right? Things evolve, things change, and yet somehow and weirdly they, they stay the same. Some of the negative traits, we also received a number of groups, youth groups, and it never dawned on me really. They were just they were there. They would come and sometimes, sometimes they were difficult.
Like, do you have a story?
Well,
is there one you can think of?
There are
right there?
The quintessential American who comes, and Spain isn't, when you think about potential discomfort, Spain is, you have nice hotels and like comfortable beds and what I would consider normal food, right? And you have not the typical. I was going to say typical. Not all Americans are like this, but you get some Americans who come and they're used to a certain level of comfort or food is cooked a certain way, and when they don't get that, they can start to get a little uncomfortable. And so you have the full gamut of that, like people who come and they're ready to be in the moment and in the country, and then people who are uncomfortable. And it's hard. And so, so I think that's what I don't know if I have a specific person in mind when I say this. And it was also many, many years ago. But I think for me, the shift came when I was in Spain, and we had a group come from a church in Atlanta, from Atlanta, and they were there for a week or 2 weeks. And that just happened to be the summer that my family went to the States on home assignment. And so I was able to be there for their report of what they did in Spain. And I was, what's the word? I don't want to say offended, but I was pretty shocked at the way they were talking about the kinds of stuff that they did. To say that they exaggerated, to say that it was borderline lying, about some of the stuff that they did. And to see that as somebody who was in Spain and they were supposedly ministering to my friends and to the people that, they were friends with us, right? I think that was very eye-opening for me. And it started me on this path of really considering what these trips do and how much damage they do. Going back to some Americans being difficult, right? I worked with a missionary in, I think he was in Nicaragua, but he was Nicaraguense, right? And he would receive these groups. That was his job, to receive these groups. And we're talking in Spanish, and and he says, I have 2 categories for how I describe groups: hartoplis y sitoplis. And I didn't get it at first. You're not getting it either. But if I say it slowly and if I say it in English, this is how it's in English. It would be hard to please, easy to please.
Okay.
And so he says it in Spanish: hartoplis y sitoplis. And so the group would come, and within a day or two, he would categorize them in these 2 groups. You're either hartoplis or you're isitoplis.
That's really interesting. There is a Swahili kind of parallel to that. Itoshe y sitoshe.
Okay.
Which means it's plenty or it's never enough.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's a good way to describe some of these short-term missions trips too.
So I remember hearing people come and give that same report, right, over and over again, and even taking teams with me from a church for a short trip, and then coming back and hearing their reports. And the word little always finds its way into every description, right?
In what way?
Their little village and their little homes and their little schools, and everybody has the sweetest smile. They're all so happy and they have nothing. And it all just feels so patronizing. And I guess it's...
How do you respond to that? How do you jump in right away and say...
No, I coach ahead of time.
Okay.
Which I think is part of the thing with really great short-term mission trips, doing some really good coaching beforehand.
Sure.
Because there's a sense in which you can't prepare for what you're going to find.
Right.
But preparing people not to be prepared, which is this super uncomfortable spot for North Americans to be in.
Yeah.
We want everything organized ahead of time. But to say, you're not going to be prepared, how are you going to handle your discomfort?
Yeah.
And on the way back, talking through how are you going to tell people about what you felt? Are you going to play that same line in that same song? What is it? Africa, I came to frame you in a photo. And then they all frame Africa in a photograph. Or are you going to talk about what God is doing in this place long before you got there?
Right.
And I guess that's part of my sense too. There are plenty of places where short-term missions don't serve a good purpose, a godly purpose. But at what points do they serve a godly purpose? Because there's got to be some examples of some that came that kind of like
they do
surprised
you. They can and they do. But I wanted to that reminded me real quick of a phrase that I particularly hate, which is, it was just so great to go love on those people. And that's another phrase
Why
that you
on?
hear,
Why on them? I guess that's a kitchen thing.
But that's a sort of thing that, and people are often surprised that I don't like that phrase, because like it was great to go and love on those people. But it comes back to this idea, this white savior complex or Messiah complex, where you have all this abundance of love that you're there to pour on these people, and how great of you to do that, right? And so it can be very condescending, but you're not wrong in that I think there's a good way and there's a right way of doing short-term mission trips, and that you're absolutely right that it comes with the pre-departure, right? Preparing students and I guess churchgoers or whoever's going to go on these short-term mission trips beforehand on what to expect, also on cultural humility, right? Because isn't that a big part of it? Are you really coming to share the gospel or the love of Jesus, or are you coming to export North American middle classness?
Yeah. Well, I guess I find too that most people that go couldn't even articulate an appropriate answer to that.
Right.
I mean, I think there's a sense of Westernism that is just like water to a fish for us. I guess even a more simple question is, what are you doing? Why do you want to go there? If the answer is something grandiose, like I'm going to change the world, I'm going to save people, I'm going to lead people to the Lord, I don't know that you can do that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's practical. I don't know if that's something that you can actually do. And I think that betrays itself with that phrase, love on.
Yes.
Like, just love people. Why do you got to love on them? I don't know where that, I think that kitschiness of some of our faith betrays our simplicity in a bad way, right?
Right.
Just to kind of naivety.
Right.
Instead of saying, if you're going to go, how are you going to love someone?
Yeah.
And how do you want to be loved?
Right.
Do you want to be loved by someone coming and giving you something and then leaving? That doesn't sound like love. That sounds like charity. That sounds like, what do I owe you?
Right.
But loving people, that's pretty universal.
Right. And loving people often, maybe one of the ways short-term mission trips have changed now is social media, right? The classic Instagram picture or story, or, I'm going to go to an orphanage, for instance, and there's a phrase that, I'm going to pet some orphans. Nobody would ever say it that way, but that's effectively, it feels like that's what they're doing, right? Let's get the selfie with these orphans. And, it's problematic when you think about, I'm going to go to this orphanage for 1 or 2 days, and I'm going to get on the ground and play with these kids. And it comes from a good place. I think that I want to help. I want to, be the light for these kids and so forth. But you never stop to think about, why is it that this kid, after 30 seconds of knowing you, gives you a hug and is so attached to you? And, do you think about how many different people they have seen over the last month, every couple of days, somebody new coming in and getting on the floor and playing with them, what that might do later on with attachment, for instance? Like, those are things that we need to think about and think deeply. There are ways of helping the orphanage that are on the back end, that are in the margins, that are not seen, right? You're not going to get the Instagram picture, but there are ways of financially helping. There are ways of, helping the people who are there every day. I think that could be a significant and impactful way of doing short-term missions.
Yeah, I remember being in East Africa and hearing the kind of jobs they would give to teams. Like, they'd come up with the list ahead of time. They know the kind of photo ops that teams are going to want to bring back home. So they would choose specifically things that were kind of construction-y but wouldn't break anything, right? Because it's the same thing with working with orphans. We want that photo, and we also want to somehow pretend that we built a structure of some kind with middle schoolers, that somehow now we've learned how to make clay bricks better than people have done it for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Right.
And so we would choose, like, okay, take this back corner and I guess fix the wall there. Maybe paint, throw a coat of paint on it. All that seems like it's pointing towards this similar question. What did you come here for?
Right.
What do you want out of this experience? And I think a really wise short-term missions leader or sender or receiver would have the kind of forethought to think ahead of time to let people really enter in with the right perspective. I remember one trip that came from Newberg, a church that was sending a team over to a family in Rwanda. And they're asking themselves this question before they go: what kind of funds are we going to raise? What kind of things are we going to bring? And what kind of things are we going to do that's going to make a difference in the long-term work of the kingdom of God in this place we're going to? And so instead of bringing candy for kids, instead of bringing 120 voltage tools for 220 voltage countries, I mean, instead of preparing ourselves to go and make people in the community happy, pass out soccer balls that they're never going to see us again. We just get this one moment to give a kid a ball and they're never going to see us again. They brought soccer balls and filled the storehouses of the long-term missionaries in the place. Because if I give a soccer ball, I'm the padre, right? I'm the mzee, I'm the big guy. And the one that's going to stick around after I leave is the nobody that never brings us anything. He's just here for us. So they gave all the soccer balls to these people and they passed them out so they could continue on to build these really meaningful relationships. And then they didn't hold orphan babies. They went and they held the kids of the missionaries, right? They're babysitting white kids in Rwanda so that the missionaries that are there can go on a date, a much needed time away, a weekend to some resort somewhere, which is like the traditional view of usage of money in Africa is don't go to a resort, save it and then feed babies. Or invest in these people that are going to stick around.
Right.
They're not going anywhere. They're staying here.
Those Instagram pictures are going to be very different. You know, if you're holding, if you're next to, if you're babysitting a missionary family, but what an impact. Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier. I think the idea of helping or serving behind the scenes is so much less attractive, you know, and yet can be so much more meaningful. And those are the questions. I love the question you kept coming back to. What is it? Why are you coming? Like, why are you going? And if you do a deep dive into that and you're brutally honest with yourself, some of those answers might be a little scary. But going back to your construction, which it's because you hear these reports too of different buildings that, you know, the missionary team comes in and they paint it, and then when they leave, they paint it white again for the next group to come in, you know. And but the construction too, you mentioned, you know, these middle schoolers or high schoolers who are now all of a sudden construction workers. And that's so true, because not only are you not an expert in what you are doing abroad, right? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. There are mission trips that are kind of around sort of industry, right? But maybe you're not. And not only are you doing a worse job at it, you're also taking somebody else's job. You know, somebody would have gotten paid to do that. You know, and instead of constructing something that's not going to last, you could put that money that, you know, towards hiring somebody there to do the job. Yeah. And so that goes back to the question, you know, like, what is it that you're doing? Why are you here? And it can lead you to some good places, I think, to really think deeply about why you're doing these short-term mission trips.
Well, and the other side of it too is a sense that there really is a lot of good that we can do in loving and serving people. And that also adjusts who we are. Because I know one of the big things that seems highly impactful about going in short-term missions is you have the first taste of opening up your world. You have the first opportunity to look around and see other people see things differently than I do, and I might not be right. And I think that makes an incredible amount of like seed planting investment in people that go on and do this more, do this for longer term, or make a different kind of way of living in the world they come from. And I think in that sense, if you can also plan ahead with people that are going on a short-term trip to ask the question, how are you going to be served?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's part of the complex too. I am the God, so they shall not serve me. They shall not wash my feet. I will wash theirs. Instead of saying, actually, every time a team comes, it takes a tremendous amount of work for the recipients of the help, right? Because now you're going to show up, but we're going to cook for you. We're going to clean your spot. Right. We're going to actually have to take you to the clinic because you freaked out because you got a bug. We're going to have to take you to your touristy spot, and we're going to sit in the van while you go and see the animals. Yeah, I'll waste my day on all of that because you're worth it. Yeah. Because you, this Western person, are worth the time that's going to come and change who you are for the better.
Right. Is that a
being
good enough
recipient.
argument, though? Is that a good enough argument for short-term missions? The fact, because I've heard that argument before, where they say, it's less about how the impact you have on other people, but how you yourself are changed. Is the damage that you do, is the potential damage you do, does that balance out the changes that occur to you individually?
Emphatically, yes.
Really?
And this is why. If you know it ahead of time, like if you plan it,
Yeah.
if you say, I am going there to be served, if you have the audacity to say, God in me wants to do something in me and it's going to change my life so I can change others.
Right.
There's going to be a whole bunch of humility in that. I'm not going to do nearly as much damage because I'm not going to save people. I'm going with humility, like you said in the beginning, right?
Sure.
I'm going with a sense that, oh my goodness, these people have hard situations and they're still humble enough to serve.
Yeah.
I could do that too.
Okay, but if I can push back a little bit more,
Yeah.
Do you need to go on a short-term missions trip for that to happen, or can you just travel? And secondly, again, because this is the argument I hear often, which is, people they're changed, right? And one of the ways that they're changed is the impact that can have seeing so much poverty. And so they come back and they say, we can go through the phrases that they say, right? Which is, wow, they have nothing and they're so happy.
Yeah.
Or it was so great to love on those people. But another one is, wow, I am so blessed. It was so great to come back and recognize how much I have, how blessed I am to have all these things, right? I saw how poor these people were. Wow. Thank you, Lord, for blessing me.
Yeah.
And I'm being a little bit facetious.
No, you're totally
here,
right. And I was facetious in my words too, right? Because I didn't say people that are poor. I said specifically people with really hard stories.
Right.
Because reality is I have a hard story too.
That's right.
I think you're right. I think that if you are simply going for your own context, you have to rename it. Because our broad overarching picture of mission is that God is on mission and we're joining God's mission. Right. So if we have this phrase like short-term mission, we have to keep it in really loose hands to say, the reality is this short-term stuff is godly travel, maybe, or faith-based
faith-based vacations.
Volunteerism. Yeah. And if we say it that way again, like just call it what it is.
Right.
I'm not going to, I don't even know how would I raise money for that other than to say out loud, I am just going to visit a place.
Right.
You want to give me some of your money? You want to give me some of your money to go visit a place?
Right. And that's what's frustrating. My wife she's also the daughter of missionaries. And we often have conversations around people who raise support for these kinds of trips. And our comment is always, I also want to go to Thailand. I also want to, but going back to what we were saying, the impact that it can have to see some of the poverty and some of these difficult stories. Again, poor people don't exist around the world so that we can feel good about what we have in this country.
Yeah.
Nor do they exist so that we can then come back and pretend that we improved the situation. So again, I don't know to what extent I need a short-term missions trip per se in the sort of traditional definition of it, in order to have that same kind of impact. And this is we're going back what we were talking about earlier, which is and we're stereotyping, of course, we're making some generalizations, but I'm surprised at the amount of North American Christians who have it's troubling to them to go on vacation. And I tell them, go on vacation. Mm-hmm. You want to go to Tanzania? Go to Tanzania and stay in the hotels. Join the tours. Go on safari. You're bringing money to a government, to a country that the country itself is going to hopefully have infrastructure and help the people, and they will know better how to help people than you spending a week, and then taking 2 days at the end to go on the safari as a sort of reward for having done
God's
good.
work. Yeah, right. And I guess maybe a fair way to frame all of that is to say, just be honest and be careful.
Yeah.
If you're going to go and just tour, then just say that. Be honest.
And if you're okay with it, and it's okay to do that.
Yeah. If you're going to go and love people, then say that and do that, but don't expect to be waited on then, right? Don't throw a fit when your laundry isn't washed right and your plane was late. Like, you're just going to love so you can love in the airport. If you get stuck there, you get stuck there.
And that's okay.
That's what you came to do.
So you're saying don't be a hartoplis?
Yes, don't be a isitoshe. That's right. And be careful, because what you do affects other people.
Yeah, for sure.
Be careful. Think ahead.
Yeah.
Plan on not being able to plan. Plan on seeing the world from a different perspective and being wrong about what yours was.
Right. Yeah, I like what you keep coming back to, which is the thinking deeply and considering the why. Like really consider why. Part of the problem is with short-term mission trips is such a part of our culture in the United States that we don't really even think about it anymore. It's just kind of a thing that you do every year, and you join the youth group and you join the fundraisers, and then you go abroad, you come back with the same similar stories. And so to not only on an individual level, but also a challenge to pastors and youth pastors to have these conversations. I want to recommend a book. So I'll recommend, of course, one. I'll cheat and say I'll recommend two, because one everybody's heard of, When Helping Hurts, and I always forget their names. Finkert and
Corbett.
Yes, thank you. It's a classic text, When Helping Hurts, and it can be a challenging text because it gets to questions like, the money that you're spending, the money that you're raising to go abroad, are you better off just sending that money over to organizations that are on the ground already? And you got to think about that. You got to really consider, is it better to just send the money? And so it can be, there's like a handbook that you can go through, and I would strongly recommend that. But again, everybody's heard of that. So I'm going to cheat and recommend an essay by Ivan Illich, and it's called To Hell with Good Intentions. And it's this beautiful speech that he gave back in the 1960s. So I think it was like 1967. And it's really short. It's like 7 or 8 pages. And he takes to task this idea that, and he's not even talking about short-term missions. It was more of a kind of a short-term, I forget what the organization was. It was kind of like the Peace Corps, maybe, that kind of thing, where you're going in for not very long and then coming back. No, it wasn't the Peace Corps, because he mentions like even the Peace Corps spends more money training the youth that come in. But he goes into all these ideas, these things about how at best, you're not going to help anybody. At best, you're importing North American white middle class values. That's what you're importing. And at the very end, he ends with this beautiful exhortation. Is that a word?
Exhortation.
I'm going to exhort. Yeah, thank you. Exhortation. I was thinking in Spanish, exhortación. Because he says, like, come to Mexico. It's specifically Mexico. He said, come to Mexico, come and climb our volcanoes and stay in our resorts and eat our food and participate in our culture. Come and do that, but don't come and pretend that you're going to help.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'll leave you with those two. I'm sure you've read When Helping Hurts, so you're familiar with it. But Ivan Illich, I would recommend.
I don't know if I can do this then. I have 2 books. One is Paulo Freire,
Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Yes. He has this picture that he describes about empty heads.
Yes.
Right? We're going to come and we're going to fill all the heads up with all the stuff we know, instead of recognizing that actually heads are full. People are full of their lived experiences. And if we come to a place of short mission, like we're going to fill up a bunch of empty heads with the gospel or with the light or with love, we're totally missing the boat on humanity, that God's been there a lot longer than we have. And he's going to be there a lot longer after we leave. That's one. The other is a book called Making Culture by Andy Crouch.
Okay.
This book is really interesting too. He is describing the myth of culture changers. Like my entire life, I've grown up hearing in youth group, you're going to change the world. You're going to change the culture for Jesus. He's like, no, you're not. Culture is massive. Culture is enormous. And you're not, how can you change it? The reality is that you get to be a part of what God's doing within a culture.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, our work hopefully is just like the incarnation, where Jesus steps into the middle of a particular culture and loves it and retranslates it. And then it changes, right? Culture changes, not because Nick has a great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, culture changes as people live their experiences with a different translation of.
I like that, because not only do you reframe this idea, but you also lower the pressure. You can think of the youth growing up in church thinking that I have to change the culture, and all of a sudden you can release that pressure a little bit. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the responses I often get from students when I talk about this is they get defensive, and some get offended, because they talk about their own experience, their own short-term mission trip. And I try to tell them, you're not going to change the past you've done what you've done, you did it with good intentions. This is not what this is about. This is about moving forward, thinking deeply about how mission trips are done now. If you're doing it with your church, this isn't about making you feel badly about something that you've done, or at least that's how I try to do it.
Daniel Sweeney is a prof at the seminary. One of the things he always says is not what you have done, it's what you do because of what you've done.
I love it.
And that feels like you could apply that to everything, including a short-term
certainly
mission trip.
Yeah, especially if you're feeling guilty. If you listen to this and you're thinking, wow, I did that. I was a part of this. And then you get, or because that's the other reaction is they get really down on themselves and, I shouldn't have done this. So I love that. Say it one more time.
It's not what you have done. It's what you do because of what you've done.
It. That's great. Yeah. Okay. Well, now we're going to drop a pin on the globe.
All right.
And what we're going to do, we're going to spin the globe, stop it somewhere, and then we're just going to talk about whatever we know about the area. And if we don't know anything, then we don't know anything. Let's see where we land. That looks like China.
Ooh.
China. Have you been to China?
There was a kid that came from China to Tanzania.
Really?
He was this really interesting guy where he was one of the ones that like his parents made him come and just kind of forced him to have this experience in the world. Mm-hmm. And actually that turned out to be a whole lot better than some of the ones that come with the, God complex on their shoulder, because he shows up and he does not want to be there. And so when he sees a change, like something that he recognizes is actually, this is different than the way we do it. And I kind of like it. Mm-hmm. He was kind of shocked enough to be ready for it. Anyway, I knew this kid named Terry. He was awesome.
Did he speak English?
He had
how's
English,
your Mandarin?
His English was like a third language. I only speak a little bit of Mandarin. Ni hao ma, wo hen shui. Okay. And I think this is right. 注意有一块的一千, which means, hello, I am handsome. It was a lovely flight. That's about all I got.
Very important phrases to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in Taiwan many years ago, and I was trying to learn Mandarin as well, but I remember it. Yeah, same thing. Ni hao ma, xi huan. I think xi huan is the only thing that I say correctly in Mandarin because the tones, and it's because I was learning Mandarin and my teacher, she wasn't very picky on the tones. I think she just wanted us to get more vocab. But then my wife she was my friend as well, but she's a German missionary in Taiwan. And I was talking to her and I was so proud of my Mandarin. And she took me to town. She's like, "You're not speaking. Like, what is this that you are speaking? This is not." And we landed on Xi Huan. She's like, "You got to say it's like Xi Huan, And I practiced it. And I think it's the only thing that I say correct. It's a hard language. I think for somebody who doesn't know, who's not accustomed to the tones, it can be really difficult. But
there's a tongue twister, I think, in Mandarin, and I never got it right. But it's just the phrase "ma." In several different tones, and it has a full sentence, ma, 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 something like that. I don't know how it is, but yeah, that's what I know about China.
Well, great. Well, as always, it's fun to talk about traveling in this context. I think it's particularly important because the message needs to be something along the lines of, if you're going to do short-term missions, there's a way to do it, and there's a way to do it right, and you should think deeply about it, but you should travel. You should talk to people. You should try new things. You should be adventurous, and you should be safe sometimes.
This video podcast is a production of George Fox Digital. To find more material like this, you can subscribe to George Fox Talks on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Our team really appreciates your feedback in the form of likes, comments, and reviews, and we'd really love to hear what you think. To sign up for our weekly email list and to keep up to date with the latest episodes and publications, you can check us out on the web at georgefox.edu/talks. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.